Good morning and welcome to the Cattaraugus County Museum and Research Library. We're located in Machias, New York, right on Route 16, next to Lime Lake. My name is Brian McClellan. I am the curator of the museum, and I am here to talk a little bit about our current exhibit. Right now we are featuring the Randolph mammoth, which we're very, very excited about. This is a fairly important archaeological find that was made here in Cattaraugus County in Randolph. We did have it on display for about 2 years, from 2016 to 2018, and then it went elsewhere for a while, and we're very pleased to have it back here on display. I'm guessing you can see it behind me here. What you're looking at here is a cast of the original skull and tusks. The original skull is still in Albany at the State Museum. It's not in great shape, so it doesn't travel. We do have the original tusks here in the cases next to me. The one right next to me here is a complete tusk, and behind me there's another one that's cut in half. That was actually intentional. They were trying to do some research on it. My understanding was to try to determine age. The belief was if they did a cross-section of the tusk, that they could count the rings like on a tree, because as the mammoth would grow every year, the tusk would grow and you'd end up with growth rings. Unfortunately, apparently when they did that, the interior was deteriorated too far for that to be accomplished. A little background on the mammoth itself. It was discovered, as I say, just outside of the village of Randolph. They were digging a pond at the state fish hatchery. And this was Saturday, I believe, May 19th, 1934. Some workers were, as I say, they were digging the pond, and they struck something with a power scraper. And what they actually struck was the skull. And they realized fairly quickly, this was again a Saturday afternoon, they realized fairly quickly that it was something unusual that they had discovered. So they were a little more circumspect going forward with the excavation. But once they realized that this was something very unique, they found a tusk and another. They called Albany, because this was, as I say, the state fish hatchery. So this was state land. And the assistant state paleontologist at the time, a Dr. Christopher Hartnagel, was dispatched to oversee the continuing excavation. As I did say, the mammoth was discovered on a Saturday. The paleontologist, Dr. Hartnagel, was on the train out on Monday, the following Monday. Word spread fairly quickly in the community of what was going on over at the fish hatchery. And in the days that followed, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, thousands of locals actually showed up on site to witness this. A woman who was on our board of trustees for a very, very long time, Ann Easton, who lives nearby in Delavan, remembers this. She was actually 7 years old, and she recalls her father coming home and telling all the kids to go get in the car. There's something going on over the fish hatchery. And the way she describes it to me is she has just memories of excitement and people and cars lined up and everyone watching, and the smell of the earth and everything. So this is, as a side note, was one of the reasons when we were first able to get the mammoth here on location in our museum to display. It was very, very important to us for Ann's sake, because this was such an important thing to her. But moving forward, the paleontologist arrives on Monday. They spend the next few days carefully excavating. Dr. Hartnagel, when asked by one of the local papers about the find, at the time had said that he believed it was a woolly mammoth, and that it was of great scientific importance because it was the first find of its kind in New York State. What makes it particularly unique for New York State is that Mammoths are kind of rare in New York. Mastodons are much more common to find. I think that the ratio of mastodons to mammoths that have been found in New York State is on the range of like 6 to 1. And in many cases, what mammoths have been found, it's just a bone or two or a tooth. In this case, this is actually, the Randolph mammoth was the most complete mammoth ever found in New York State. They located the skull, which was something like 300 pounds. They had the tusks. They had some rib bones. They had some vertebrae, some leg bones, and so on. All of this was carefully cared for because Dr. Hartnagel recognized very quickly that as they were taking these items out of the clay that they had been buried in and exposing them to air, if they weren't properly cared for, they would deteriorate very, very quickly. So by the end of that week, again, these were found on a Saturday, by the end of that week, they were crated up and shipped back to Albany, where continuing preservation efforts were made. And ultimately, they were placed on display in the State Museum, and they remained on display for decades. One of the photos that I provided that I don't know, maybe you'll be able to show, actually shows the skull and the tusks, the original skull and the tusks as they were in the museum. Some point, late 70s, early 80s, I believe, State Museum changed their exhibits around and these items went into storage. And we had requested a few times over the years whether or not the mammoth could be loaned to us. And for one reason or another, it didn't happen. I believe when I first started here, this was around 2007, I think the response we got was that it was just too fragile to be able to be moved like that. But about 2011, we got word that the tusks and the cast skull were actually on their way to Jamestown, where they were going to be displayed at the Roger Tory Peterson Institute. And so we immediately put in a request that, hey, when it's done there, can we have it? And we were told that there was actually another museum in line after us, which was the Robertson Museum in Binghamton. But after that, yes, we could. And so in July of 2016, I went out with our very helpful maintenance staff here from the county with the county big box truck, and we went to Binghamton one morning and crated everything up and packed it as carefully as we possibly could and moved it out here. And again, we were very excited at the time. And it was a huge draw for us for that 2 years. It's interesting that the number of people that were just fascinated by this and that it was found here in Cattaraugus County. So after it left here, it went on, as I said, 2 years here. It went on to the Great Swamp Conservancy in Canastota, New York. And after that, it went back to Randolph, actually, and it was on display in the Randolph Library. And Dr. Robert Feranick, who is the paleontologist, the current vertebrate paleontologist for New York State, had asked me, well, it's supposed to be in Randolph for a year. After that, there's nobody else on the list. Would you like it back? And I said, of course, yes, we would. And that term, that year, was supposed to end somewhere around April or May of 2020. And so everything kind of came to a halt, and I hadn't heard anything for a long time. And in September, this past September of 2021, I did finally get an email from Dr. Feranick and said, hey, are you still interested? I said, yeah, absolutely. And what are you thinking? I'd like to be able to plan an exhibit around it and everything. And I didn't hear anything, and I didn't hear anything. And then finally, I got another email right around Halloween, and it said, yeah, we're gonna move the mammoth up on November 15th. So I had to very quickly prepare to get it back here. And so we have it again on display for a period of, right now it's looking like 18 months. And to go with that, and I have to give credit here to my 8-year-old son, Nathaniel, because when I told him we were getting the mammoth back, he's very interested in of course, dinosaurs and the mammoth itself. asked if it would be possible to do a fossil exhibit. I said, well, let's find out. So I contacted Dr. Franek again and said, do you have any other items that you could loan us? And he did. He had some that he would bring with him. And I contacted the Buffalo Museum of Science to ask if they could loan us anything. And they basically gave me free rein of their education collection. I was completely stunned. They took me back to their collections room with an entire wall full of drawers with items in them, and gave me a cart and said, take whatever you'd like. So I was like a kid in a candy store. And my guiding principle throughout all of that was, what would my son find neat? So we have on display to go with the mammoth an exhibit of all kinds of fossils and artifacts from brachiopods and other things that you can find in your, on your driveway, on up to megalodon tooth and saber-tooth, tiger tooth cast, and a lot of other things. So we're hoping that this is a popular exhibit as well. I know it's winter time and not as people aren't going out to museums as much, but we're trying to generate some publicity on this. Getting back to the Randolph mammoth, there's a little bit of a question of what type of mammoth it was. As I said, Dr. Hartnagel, when it was first discovered, identified it as a woolly mammoth, and that was what was on all the original newspaper articles. They referred to it as the woolly mammoth or the hairy mammoth. Later study indicated they believed that it was actually a Columbian mammoth. And the difference between the two is the Columbian mammoth, if you look at illustrations of it, looks more like a big elephant. The woolly mammoths were slightly smaller than like an African elephant, whereas the Columbian mammoths were larger, and they were hairless. They didn't have the furry coats that the woolly mammoths did. And they believed that the Randolph mammoth was a Columbian mammoth, which made it even more unique in that it was the first of that kind ever found in New York State. Columbian mammoths are more commonly located, I guess, south and west of the New York State area, Ohio River Valley area, and further towards Missouri, I believe. It's not something that was found up this way. This specimen that was located, the tusks here were about 75 pounds. An adult Columbian mammoth tusk can become as large as 400 pounds apiece. So that would indicate that this was either a juvenile or perhaps a female, not a full-grown adult male at any rate. Dr. Franek, who has come and he's spoken here at the museum a couple of times since the mammoth was first brought here, has said that his opinion is that it is a woolly mammoth, which kind of threw me into a little bit of a panic, because this was at the time when I was first planning the original exhibit that we had, and all of the interpretive signage, everything that I had made up, as you can see behind me, they all say Columbian mammoth, and he says that it still might be. It's very difficult to tell the difference, but his opinion is that it is a woolly mammoth. Another thing that I found interesting in learning the difference between the different prehistoric creatures is that mammoths versus mastodons. As I say, mastodons much more common to find in New York State. I grew up going a lot to the Letchworth State Park in Livingston County, and in the museum there, their kind of big focal piece is a mastodon skull with the tusks. So I was somewhat familiar growing up with that. I wasn't aware of how different the two were. And one of the primary differences, and we have some examples in the cases right now, are in the teeth themselves. Mastodon teeth look like teeth. They look like great big molars. Mammoth teeth are a little bit different. They're actually closer to what modern elephant teeth look like, or even, as my wife says, what cow bovine teeth look like. In the case here, as you can see, we do have an example of a mammoth tooth and a mastodon tooth. These are on loan from the State Museum in Albany. And as I mentioned, the mastodon tooth does, I mean, you look at that and you're going to be able to tell if that's a tooth. The mammoth tooth, maybe not so much. It is a little bit different. Um, the reason for this difference was that mastodons were browsing animals. They would eat leaves, fruit, maybe green branches and so on. They needed to be able to kind of crunch up food. Whereas mammoths were strictly grazing animals. They ate grasses, so they needed plate teeth that could grind the grasses up to be digestible. One of the other things that I did learn apparently too is if you look at the top of the mammoth tooth there, as you can see the layers, those would, as the mammoth aged, they would kind of slough off and layers would break off. And one of the things that limited their lifespan wasn't necessarily health or food supply or anything like that. It could be just when their teeth deteriorated to the point that they could no longer graze, they could no longer eat the grasses. One of the interesting features about where the Randolph mammoth was located and perhaps why it was such a complete skeleton is the fact that this part of Cattaraugus County, the southern and western part of Cattaraugus County, largely where if you look at a map where Allegheny State Park is now almost exactly, is the one part of New York State that was not covered by a glacier. And there's an illustration here that shows this. You can see all of New York except for Long Island and this little bit right down there, which almost perfectly coincides with Allegheny State Park, was not covered with glacier, which is why if you hike in Allegheny State Park now, you'll see that the big rock formations, which were actually part of the prehistoric seafloor that were then pushed up by the mountains. Everywhere else, they would have existed, but they were scraped away by the glaciers. So in Allegheny State Park, they're still there, which is kind of a neat feature. And on the same token, Randolph, where the mammoth was located, is just right on the edge of that. So there's a good chance that the mammoth was in such good condition and in such complete condition just because of the fact that, out of pure coincidence, it was in one spot where the glacier didn't just completely scrape everything away. The mammoth was believed to be about 13,000 years old. And as you kind of look down the panels here, we have some other, we talk about what the New York State looked like around the time when the mammoth was alive. We have a comparison here of by size of elephants. You can see the African elephant is a little larger than the woolly mammoth. The mastodon was smaller still, actually. The Columbian mammoth, if this indeed was a Columbian mammoth, was a little larger than a modern African elephant. And then moving down further, you can see where mammoths have been located in New York State. As I say, mastodons a much more common find. One of the things that I found very interesting the first time I saw this map is that if you look, there are actually two of these indicators in Cattaraugus County. And I did a little research and discovered that around 1879, a farmer outside of Olean found a mammoth tooth. We don't know what happened to that. Unfortunately, it never made it into a museum or anything. Apparently, it was just kept in the family, and somewhere along the line, we've lost track of that. But so, of the very few mammoths that have been found in New York State, we've had actually two right here in Cattaraugus